William Traynor seemingly has the perfect life, a nice apartment, a beautiful girlfriend, and a high-powered corporate job. But this all changes one morning as he rushes to work in the rain. Busy on a phone call, not paying attention, he hails a taxi across the road. When a horn beeps, his eyes light up, and we hear the sound of tires screeching. Louisa Clark appears to be a bright, bubbly young lady who always has a smile on her face. Dressed in her audacious outfits, she serves coffee and tea and cakes to customers at the cafe she works at. All looks well, and she seems to be having a nice time until the cafe closes and her boss apologetically fires her. It turns out that Louisa lives with her working class family, all of whom are struggling to make ends meet. The money from her job wasn't for Louisa, but for her family so they can all get by. They argue about it over dinner, but Louisa's mother is sure that she'll find something. The next day, Louisa meets up with her boyfriend Patrick at the local athletics track. He gives her advice concerning how to get back on her feet, but she's down and doesn't seem to want it. He pushes her and tells her that if she wants work, she has to keep searching. Something's out there. With nothing to lose, Louisa heads to an unemployment office. We find out that she's been through several jobs recently, having a hard time picking one that she's suited to. It's gotten so bad, in fact, there are no jobs left, except one. The officer tells her that it's a carer role for a disabled man. No experience is necessary, and perfect for Louisa. She eagerly accepts. The next day, Louisa goes on the interview for the job. It's a huge mansion that used to be a castle, implying the extreme wealth the employers. Louisa is clearly very nervous. As is almost expected with Louisa, the interview gets off to a rocky start. Will Traynor is the one interviewing, and her proper, elegant, almost regal personality and style clashes horribly with Louisa's working class roots. But Louisa babbles, unable to stop talking, and soon the charm and innocence of the woman is revealed beneath the onslaught of dribble. She thinks that she's not going to get the job, only for Camilla to ask if she can start right away. Louisa's thrilled. Camilla leads Louisa through the house to the annex. She reveals to Louisa that this role is actually for her son, who became a quadriplegic 2 years previously. As she explains the bits and pieces of the role, she makes it clear that Louisa is there to serve more as a friend to Will, rather than a paid caregiver. It's an odd description, but Louisa just appears happy to have a job. When Louisa does meet Will, she's thoroughly unsure, bound to a wheelchair, unkept hair, and a scruffy beard. The first thing Will does is make strange noises with his mouth, doing the best he can to make Louisa as uncomfortable as possible. And even when he does start to speak, it's with sarcasm and a sense of loathing. Suddenly, this job isn't looking so good. Back at home, Louisa returns to anarchy. Family's about, the kitchen's a mess, and everyone looks as stressed as possible. But then Louisa reveals that she got the job, and the entire family is elated. On her first day, Louisa gets a rundown of how to care for Will from his physical therapist, Nathan. He explains to Louisa that she doesn't have to worry about any of the heavy lifting or physical helping of Will. She asks what she's meant to do, and he doesn't seem to know. He suggests it's to cheer Will up. Her first solo interaction with Will doesn't go well. She tries to convince him to leave the house with her, or to go on his laptop to kill the time. He's sarcastic in his responses, and even a little mean. He then asks her specifically if she could be less chatty around him, a final blow in what was already a horrid conversation. Louisa does her best not to appear upset, but it clearly hurts her. She eats lunch alone out in the garden, isolated from everyone, Will especially. Despite the rocky start with Will, Louisa takes the job the best she can. Each day she turns up, dressed in one of her bright outfits, and does what she can to try and appease Will. Each day he seems more and more bemused by her, apparently incapable of caring at all. Louisa's with her sister, Trina, discussing Will. Soon the conversation turns to Trina herself, who announces that she's thinking of going back to her studies. Louisa's upset, because it means that she'll have to stay behind and look after Mom and Dad alone. Trina appears guilty, but she has no choice. She needs this, and Louisa sees it. The next day, Louisa arrives to learn some of Will's old friends had come to visit. It's unexpected, and Camilla seems wary of the visit, as if something's wrong. The visiting friends are Will's best friend Rupert and his ex-girlfriend Alicia. The conversation is stunted and awkward, and Louisa listens on with a pained expression. But then things become worse when Rupert confides that he's not only dating Alicia, but the two are also engaged. They wanted to break the news to Will together. Will is obviously heartbroken, although it comes across as cold and bitter. As Alicia leaves, she confesses to Louisa that she wanted to stay with Will after the accident, but that you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped. Louisa says nothing, but the look on her face implies that she doesn't agree. Once they're gone, Louisa hears a loud crash from the other room. She hurries to find Will's framed photos smashed on the ground. It looks as if he ran into the cabinet and knocked them off himself. Louisa's with her boyfriend Patrick, talking about Will. She can't believe that Will's best friend and ex got engaged, and she's heartbroken for him. But Patrick doesn't seem to care. He's more interested in a holiday that he and Louisa are planning. He manages to convince her to agree to Norway, where there's a race happening that Patrick wants to compete in with his friends. Louisa didn't realize this, but once she finds out, she's too nervous to speak up. She has no choice but to pretend to be excited for she and Patrick. Back at Will's house, Will catches Louisa fixing the photos that he smashed the previous day. He tells her that he doesn't want them fixed, that he hates looking at them, that he hates being reminded of who he used to be and who he is right now. He snaps at her, and finally, having had enough, Louisa snaps back. She tells him to stop being an arse because she doesn't deserve it. She then lets slip that she's only doing the job because of how much she needs the money. This seems to strike a chord with Will. That afternoon, most unexpectedly, Will invites Louisa to watch a movie with him. She doesn't like the kind of movies he watches, ones with subtitles, but she agrees. And to his delight, she loves it. It's the first real conversation they've had. And then shockingly, Will suggests they go outside. Their conversation flows and both seem to be genuinely enjoying one another's company. Even Camilla notices, which she looks rather pleased about. A trip to the hospital sees Nathan confide in Louisa just how hard Will's life is. He explains that there's no chance of recovery for him, and what's worse, because of his condition, he's easily susceptible to extreme sickness and is in constant pain. Really, his life is even worse than Will makes it out to be. At the movies that night with Patrick, Louisa suggests a foreign movie. He laughs it off and picks out a comedy instead. It's snowing outside, but inside, Will's sick. He's running a fever, and his father asks Louisa to watch him closely. She does, becoming increasingly worried as his condition worsens. She tries to call for help, but half awake, Will tells her not to worry and that he'll be fine. But the hours pass, and he becomes worse and worse and worse. Eventually, Nathan arrives, and when he sees the condition Will's in, he freaks out. He rushes to help, doing what he can to ensure that Will doesn't die. It's at this point that Louisa sees cut marks on Will's wrists, and she realizes that Will was lying to her about how he felt. Louisa stays with Will that night, despite not having to, and she sits by his side. She watches an old birthday video that Will's friends made him. In it, he's shown to be a completely different person, full of life and joy. Will wakes to find her still in his room. They talk some more, bonding, and slowly Will can be seen to be coming around. Things take a nasty turn when Louisa overhears Will's parents arguing. Apparently, Will has struck a deal with them that will see him end his life by euthanasia in 6 months' time. Camilla's distraught, not wanting it to come to this, but his father seems to think it's Will's choice, and there's nothing they can do. Naturally, Louisa's upset and considers leaving the job entirely. But then her sister points out that this doesn't have to be the end. In fact, Louisa can spend the next 6 months doing everything she can to show Will that life is worth living. Even as a quadriplegic, Louisa approaches Will's parents about her idea. They agree that if she can get Will to leave the house with her, they'll be more than happy to help in any way. Louisa knows that Will won't go anywhere on his own accord, so she lies and tells Will that Nathan has never seen horse racing and really wants to go. They do. And although Louisa's ecstatic, Will's chair immediately gets stuck in the mud. Will's embarrassed, but they call over some men to help lift him out. Despite this mishap, things seem to be going well, and Will is even enjoying himself until they try and eat at a restaurant that won't serve him. Louisa causes a scene, which embarrasses Will and ends in ruining the day. Determined not to give in, Louisa then tells Will that she's bought the tickets to a Mozart concert, as she's never been. Will looks as if he doesn't want to go, but reluctantly agrees. That night, Louisa dresses to the nines, determined to look the part. Will's also doing what he can, wears a suit, and together the two are elegant. The night's a huge hit, and Will seems to be enjoying the company more than the show itself. In fact, he loves it all so much that when they arrive back home, he asks to remain in the car a little while longer and listen to music with Louisa. She eagerly agrees. Louisa invites Will to her family's house for dinner for her birthday. The dinner goes reasonably well, despite a few awkward moments. But then Patrick turns up and his jealousy of Will becomes apparent. Will notices and decides to play into it, flirting with Louisa as a means to get a rise out of Patrick. The overjealous Patrick gifts Louisa a hideous piece of jewelry, which she has to pretend to like, while Will buys her a hideous pair of stockings, which she truly loves. The next day, Will takes Louisa on a tour of a nearby castle. While on the battlements, he tells her of his favorite place in the whole world, Paris. In particular, a little cafe that he used to love. She tries to get him to go, but he explains that he wants to go there as him. The old him, not what he is now. Back at home, Louisa's dad celebrates a new job. It turns out that Will's father hired him to work maintenance at the castle. Although Louisa's happy, she worries that he was given the job for the wrong reason. Will explains this just means that now Louisa doesn't have to worry about everyone else all the time, that she can look after herself for a change. It's Rupert and Alicia's wedding, and Will and Louisa go together. What starts out as a rather awkward affair soon becomes less so, as Louisa drinks and forces Will to mingle. A friend of Will's, Mary, derides Alicia for leaving Will, claiming that Will is special and that Louisa should be happy to have met him. She agrees, and then, just to show it, she forces Will onto the dance floor with her, sitting on his lap as his chair carves across the floor. They get stares, but they don't care. The night ends with Will fleeing down the road, Louisa on his lap, the two laughing into the night. The next day, Will's mother's worried that he was out all night, and Nathan, too, is concerned that Will was drinking, but they both notice a change in him, that he seems happier than before. Patrick and Louisa are training together. As they run, they try and plan their holiday, but Louisa remembers that she has to be with Will at that time. Patrick explodes, furious that she's spending more time with Will than he. She tries to explain that she needs to, but he runs off in anger. Despite all that she had done for him, Louisa learns that Will is still planning on killing himself, but she thinks that if she gives it one more chance, that maybe she can convince him otherwise. So she plans a huge holiday, determined to save Will's life. The night before she leaves, Patrick surprises her with dinner. Then he finds out about the holiday that she's going on with Will, and he's furious. It looks like a honeymoon, and she's ditching their holiday for another. Patrick storms off, refusing to hear reason. The holiday appears perfect. The weather's gorgeous, and they spend the day by the pool and by the beach. That night, as the storm rages outside, Louisa helps Will get comfortable in his bed. But then the mood softens. She climbs in with him, and despite everything, she leans in and the two kiss. It's soft, romantic, and perfect in every way. The next day is as good as the first, and Louisa seems to be floating on air. But that night, she admits her feelings for Will, and everything turns sour. Despite how Will feels, despite the love he obviously holds for her, he's still gonna kill himself when the time comes. She calls him selfish, but he explains that he can't live this life. It isn't his life. Furthermore, he doesn't want her to end up resenting him and all that he can't do for her while he's paralyzed. She won't listen, and after crying her eyes out, she storms off, heartbroken. Funny thing though, so's Will. They return home from the holiday, and everything's different. Despite his parents thinking there might be a chance, one look at the miserable Louisa reveals to them their worst fears. Louisa tells them that there's nothing she can do, and Camilla bursts into tears. That night, Louisa reveals to her parents what's been going on. Her mother's furious at the situation, but her father's more reserved. He explains that you can't change people. The best you can do is learn to love them for who they are, and hope it's enough. It's now that Louisa realizes she's made a huge mistake, and that she should be with Will for his last moments, not away from him. She travels to Switzerland, where Will has gone to kill himself, and there, on his final day on Earth, she helps him the only way she knows how. She lays down in bed with him. They kiss, and they simply hold one another. It's a perfect moment. A few days later, Louisa's in Paris, visiting the same cafe that Will told her he used to love. Through voiceover, we learn that Will left Louisa a final letter of goodbye. In the letter, he thanks her for what she did, and then asks that she move on and not let him hold her back. He tells her that he has left her with a large inheritance, just enough so that she can finally be free and not have to worry about helping anyone other than herself. We end with a shot of Louisa walking through Paris, a new life ahead of her. That's a wrap on our character's journey. Let me know what you think in the comments and drop your suggestions for the next movie we should chat about. Stay awesome and don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. See you on the flip side of movie magic.